Have you ever wondered what America looked like before the arrival of European settlers? Before the year 1492, the land we now call the United States was anything but empty. It wasn't a new world at all. It was an ancient land, full of people with rich cultures, powerful societies, and thriving cities. This is the story of America before colonization in 1491. Let's take a journey back in time. Imagine you're walking across the vast landscapes of North America, from the forests of the Northeast to the deserts of the Southwest. Before Europeans arrived, millions of people lived in this land. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Historians and archaeologists now believe that the population of North America before 1492 may have been as high as 10 million people, or even more. These were the ancestors of the Native American tribes we know today. But back then, they formed highly diverse and complex societies. Let's start with the eastern part of North America. In the Northeast, where states like New York and Pennsylvania now stand, there was the powerful Iroquois Confederacy. This was a league of several native nations, like the Mohawk and the Seneca, who came together for peace and mutual defense. They weren't just a group of people living in the woods. They had organized governments and even a constitution known as the Great Law of Peace. Some historians believe their system may have even inspired parts of the U.S. Constitution centuries later. The Iroquois were skilled farmers, growing crops like corn, beans, and squash, what they called the Three Sisters. Now, let's head down to the southeast, where the Mississippian culture dominated. The Mississippians were builders, architects, and rulers. They constructed huge cities with towering earth mounds, some of which still stand today. The most famous of these cities was Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis. Cahokia was the largest city in North America before 1492, with a population larger than London or Paris at the time. Imagine that. The people of Cahokia had their own social classes, political rulers, and religious ceremonies. They controlled vast trade networks that spread across the continent, trading goods like copper, shells, and even alligator teeth. The story doesn't end there. Travel west, and you'll encounter the great civilizations of the Southwest, like the Ancestral Puebloans, sometimes called the Anasazi. These people lived in the cliffs and mesas of what is now New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. They built incredible stone cities like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. Their homes were carved into cliffs, protecting them from the harsh desert sun and enemies. These weren't small villages either. Chaco Canyon was a major cultural center, complete with roads, observatories to study the stars, and massive stone structures. The Puebloans developed advanced irrigation systems to farm in the desert, growing crops like corn and beans in one of the toughest climates on Earth. North of the Puebloans in the Great Plains lived the ancestors of tribes like the Sioux and Cheyenne. These were the buffalo hunters, but it's important to know that before European contact, they weren't fully nomadic yet. Horses, which later became essential to their way of life, hadn't arrived until the Spanish brought them to the Americas in the 1500s. Before that, many plains tribes were settled farmers and traders. They lived in villages made of earthen lodges and cultivated crops along rivers, while also hunting the massive buffalo herds that roamed the plains. As we move further west to the Pacific coast, we meet the tribes of the Pacific Northwest. This was another vibrant and unique culture, built on the abundance of the ocean. The people here, like the Tlingit and Haida, were expert fishermen and craftsmen. They built enormous wooden houses and carved stunning totem poles, which told the stories of their ancestors. Salmon was their lifeblood, and they held great ceremonies called potlatches, where families gave away wealth to show their status. The Pacific Northwest tribes had no need for farming because the natural resources of the region provided so much, from the fish in the sea to the cedar trees in the forests. Let's not forget the people of the Arctic, the ancestors of today's Inuit. These hardy people lived in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Using ingenious tools and techniques, they thrived in freezing temperatures. They hunted seals, whales, and caribou, and built homes from snow and ice, known as igloos. They were masters of survival, using every part of the animals they hunted to create clothing, tools, and shelter. So, from coast to coast, America before colonization was a land full of life. The people who lived here were farmers, builders, hunters, and traders. They had governments, religions, and traditions that had developed over thousands of years. And just like in Europe, Asia, and Africa, they faced challenges like war, disease, and natural disasters. But they were also innovators, creating unique solutions to the problems of their time. But what about the environment? Many people have the idea that Native Americans lived in perfect harmony with nature, but that's not entirely accurate. Yes, they respected the natural world, but they also altered it to meet their needs. For example, in the Northeast, Native Americans practiced controlled burns of forests to make hunting easier and encourage the growth of certain plants. In the Southwest, the Puebloans built extensive irrigation canals to bring water to their crops. Even the great bison herds of the plains were managed by native hunting practices. Far from being untouched wilderness, the Americas in 1491 were shaped by human hands just as much as Europe or Asia. So, why don't we know more about this history? Part of the reason is that much of what we know about the pre-Columbian Americas comes from archaeology, oral traditions, and the writings of European colonizers, who often had their own biases. For a long time, people believed that the Americas were sparsely populated and that native cultures were simple. But now, we're learning that these assumptions were wrong. The Americas were home to millions of people, and their societies were as diverse and complex as any other on the planet. Before European colonization, America was a vast, interconnected world, a place of thriving cultures, incredible cities, and advanced technologies. The land was shaped not by the Europeans who came after 1492, but by the millions of native peoples who lived here long before. And that's a part of history we should never forget.